Welcome to Dementia Friendly Prince George's County, Maryland Northern Sector webinar series for caregivers. Today's topic is successful aging, sponsored by Prince George's County Government and the Department of Family Services.
But for those of you who don't know, just a little bit more information about Seabury and myself, and then I'll jump right into successful aging. We are a nonprofit that the larger organization has been around for almost 100 years. We're going to celebrate 100 years in 2 years from now, so in 2024. And the care management program, we're all social workers who have been in aging or healthcare for upwards of 5 years. Most of us, I've been there for 13 years and spent 20 years in aging and healthcare now. And our role is to really understand the needs of our clients and their family, understand what supports are in place, and then try to plug in the holes so that they can age well and age successfully. And that's what I'm here to talk about today, is successful aging. And I like to start off the program by just asking this phrase, and it's just something for you to consider, because successful aging is so personal. But how old would you be if you didn't know how old you were? And that's a quote by Spatial page. And the reason why I bring it up is because most of the time when I'm talking with someone about the different services that are out there to support people as they want to age in place as they get older, they typically tell me, no, those are for old people. That's not for me. And I know even for myself, I have a picture of myself in my head. I have, and it's not just what I look like, but who I am, what makes me who I am. And it certainly changes and adapts. And every once in a while, I think we kind of hit a reality on certain things. Meaning, for example, I was very athletic and considered myself to be pretty strong for just a woman. And I guess it was just before the pandemic, we had one of these big storms, and 3 or 4 people drove around this branch that was in the middle of the street. And I was like, come on, people, just get up and move it. And I got up and I tried to pick it up. I even stopped my car, and I found, oh yeah, 2 babies later, 20 years outside of college, and yeah, I can't lift that either. So, we sometimes do hit upon these realities. But it is very personal. And I see that Pamela has put up a note. I do like these conversations to be as interactive as we can be, which I realize is only so much in this medium. But if you have a comment or a question, feel free to put it in, and we'll see if we can either weave it in or and then answer questions at the end. There will definitely be time. So what is successful aging to you? I mean, they say that we have 30 years more to live than we did previously. I know, although recently and during the pandemic, I think our longevity has actually dropped instead of gone further out. But still, the amount of time that we gained is still very close to 30 years. So what will you do with that time? In order to start somewhere, I think we need to have a common definition of successful aging. And the one that I like is actually from Bowling Green State. And they call it optimal aging as opposed to successful aging. And what they say is it's the capacity to function across many domains: physical, functional, cognitive, emotional, social, and spiritual, to one's satisfaction and in spite of medical conditions. And I think that's a good place to start. It means that we want to think that we have good health, We want to have a low risk of disease and disability because all that adds to our quality of life. We want to have a high mental and physical functioning, and we want to be engaged. We want to have an active life, be a part of a tribe. And again, I think active as well can be different to different people. And I'm not talking about movement, although that's clearly going to be a part of this. But how engaged are you? How do you play out your engagement? Because some of us are very introverted and we don't need to be out as much. Other people are more extroverted and they feed off of this. And how do we make those changes in a world that is still in the midst of hopefully coming out of a pandemic? But we very much know that that's now a potential thing that could happen. One of the things that I'm going to talk about as I go in here or weave in as well is the blue zone. I don't know if you all have heard of that or not, but this gentleman went out with the National Geographic and found, I think it was the 6 communities in the world that have the most centenarians, or the most people who have aged to 100 or more, and found the commonalities in life. And I think all the things that we've talked about or that we will talk about in successful aging, but we as a community have talked about, we're really embedded in that. And I think you'll find that they're all tied together. So much of this we've probably heard before, but just bringing a new light to it to help you kind of say, okay, what is my successful aging? What does that look like to me? And as I said, we talked about how it would be with good health, the optimal aging. Again, let me just go back to get my specific note, said, in spite of one's medical conditions. Well, we know that we are definitely going to have medical conditions. The CDC says that right now about 87% of Americans over age 65 have at least one chronic disease, if not more than one. Those are things like COPD, heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes. All of those can be chronic illnesses, but the number one piece, of course, is high blood pressure. And we also know now how much all of these things also impact our brain functioning as well. We've also heard how much of this is impacted by our nutrition. I put on there especially the sodium because that is a big thing with the high blood pressure. And in the work that I do, I see a lot of the hydration issues. Certainly heart disease and cancer would be the second leading killer. So taking a look at nutrition to start with, I really like this My Plate for Older Adults that Tufts hands out. I'm sure they're going to update it soon, but I like it for a couple of reasons. Just to point out on the bottom, it says, remember to stay active. So you'll see, as I said, things start feeding one into another. But then it also has up in the corner, and I'm pointing as if you can see what I'm pointing at, up in the right-hand corner, it has the fluid intake. So many of the older adults we work with, when they go to the ER, the first thing that the doctor says is they hook them up to IV fluids. And no matter what the underlying is, it seems to be that there's a hydration issue. Let me just click on here to see if that's showing to you all now.
No, it's still not there.
Okay, why don't you go ahead? I apologize, everyone. We did actually practice this.
Mhm. No.
I will stop sharing my screen and then, yeah, you can put your screen up and I will make use. Sorry, first I have to get to a better place on my screen now, or get you guys to the right size then. Okay, so we are on, I think it's slide 6 and nutrition. Okay, yep, perfect. Okay. So as I was saying here, you have up in the right-hand corner, you have the fluids. Down at the bottom, you have the activities. Um, the other thing that we've been finding is that plant slant. That's the verbiage that Blue Zone uses, but typically it has to do with having half of your plate be the fruits and the vegetables, less of the especially red meats, but certainly less of the processed foods. So you think things like the Mediterranean diet, we hear quite a bit about that. It tends to be low sodium. I know that's been something that some of your other speakers have also talked about. Um, the piece with the processed foods, I can't emphasize enough. We can still eat healthily if we're eating canned goods and we're switching over to frozen. It doesn't always have to be fresh. You have to do what your budget and what your life allows. But you can do some simple things like rinsing off the beans when you get them out of the can. Trying to get all of that salt off and not all of it, but a decent amount. We do need some salt to survive, but not adding in extra. So for example, I tend to cook a lot with canned tomatoes. So I try to reach for the non-salted variety or the low salt variety. And then if the recipe calls for salt, I don't add in extra salt because I know that there's already salt from the food processing that's in there. One of the things I also wanted to let you know about as a resource for you is that Medicare Part B should pay for a one-time nutrition screening if you have things like diabetes or kidney disease, or you just had a transplant. So this is something you should talk with your provider about. Can you get a consult with a nutritionist and maybe take a look at little things that you can do? Next slide. So the next thing we want to talk about is just, again, another part of it is medications. With these chronic illnesses, we frequently do end up having to take medications. So are we taking them appropriately? Are they the best fit for ourselves? I know that I think it's been hammered into us that we need to bring a list of our medications into the medical appointment. And the reason why we do that is because we want each of the doctors to be able to speak to how this medication interacts with other medications. Are there any that are contraindicated? Does the doctor actually realize you are now on 15 different medications, and is that appropriate? One of the first things I do as a social worker is to take a look at somebody's medications and just see, I'm not a nurse, but I have been in this job long enough to realize if you've got a list that's a page long, is there a way we can cut this down? There are other complications that develop with having so many medications. And I think it's fair for you as a person receiving service from a doctor to question when you're put on a new medication. No, Dr. Jones, tell me exactly how does this interact with these different medications? And I stress that because I frequently attend medical appointments and especially the heart appointments or the cardiology appointments, the nurse goes through all the medications, but I've only once had a doctor actually look through them and go on his computer and say, oh, look, this has contraindications for this, so we could use this instead. And I do think a lot of that is done behind the scenes, but I think it's perfectly fine for you to try to bring some of it from out behind the curtain. Certainly, annual flu shots, pneumonia shots, or pneumonia and shingles vaccines when they come due is very important, especially for older adults, just to maintain that quality of health care. And of course, our new reality is what will happen with COVID, getting those vaccines, getting that booster. Who knows if it's going to end up being something we get on a regular basis now. The other thing with your medications that you should take a look at and talk about are there supplements that you are taking, and how do those interact with medication? And I can tell you that the honest answer from the doctor is often we just don't know because there's not enough research done. But I think it's still, and again, you can also talk to your pharmacist about it, because the pharmacist is in some cases the more, their specialty is medication. So talk with the doctor, talk with the pharmacist about, okay, well, if I'm going to take this supplement, whether, it be something for brain functioning that I've heard about, when should I take it? Should I take it with another medication, or should I try to avoid certain medications? The other piece, which is going to lead me into the next set of slides, is if I drink, when do I drink it? And I just like this quote that just came up on the screen here. I don't do alcohol anymore. I get the same effect just from standing up. I always think that's a cute one. But moving on to the next slide, the alcohol is toxic. There's just really no two ways about it. Our body has difficulty processing alcohol. So although there are some fairly well researched positive aspects to it, if you haven't been drinking, don't start just for those positive benefits, because the amount that you probably will need to drink won't do you any good. If you do drink, keep in mind that as your body gets older, it does take longer to process alcohol. So the recommendations with regard to drinking do go down. Those of us who are female will know that ours don't actually change that much, but the recommended drinking limit for people over 65 is not more than 7 in 1 week and not more than 3 in 1 day. So in other words, if I'm the type of person who has a glass of wine or a beer with dinner or whatever to relax after work, then I have 6 more for the rest of the week. If I happen to have a really exciting night, or maybe I go out to a nice dinner to celebrate, that's what my husband and I did before we had kids. You might have a bottle of wine, which split between 2 people is about 3 glasses apiece. So then I would only have 4 for the rest of the week. And you might think to yourself, well, people who are 70 and 80 don't drink. Or maybe that's just the younger people on here that might say that. Because, older adults don't have sex, they don't do anything. That's just not true. And in fact, one of the higher groups for binge drinking does end up to be older adults, and binge drinking in this case would be anything over 3 in 1 day, especially in one sitting. some of that may be just a lack of understanding about the impact or the lack of understanding of what a drink constitutes. You know, a beer is much different from wine, is much different from a liqueur, or a shot of something like whiskey or vodka, etc. So that all of that has to be kept in mind. The other thing that we talk about during looking at health is the impact of smoking. Those individuals who are 60 and over, it's estimated that at least half of that group has smoked during their lifetime, or at least tried smoking or other drugs. And what researchers frequently hear from older adults is that the benefit of stopping won't really equal enough to make it worth their while, and that's just not true. The truth of the matter is, as soon as you stop smoking, your risk of a stroke goes down quite substantially. Your blood flow automatically gets better, and that's what we're trying to talk about when you're talking about brain health and getting the healthy blood back up, or the oxygenated blood back up to your brain. It also reduces some of the COPD. That's one of the reasons why COPD is also listed as a chronic disease in here. Keep in mind that smoking reduces life expectancy by 13 to 15 years. So I just told you that we get and presumably get about an extra 30 years. So with smoking, you've cut that in half. So you can stop smoking at any age and feel the benefits immediately. The next slide, with high physical and mental functioning, those are the really important things when we're talking about successful aging, right? We want to be able to move. We want to be able to use our bodies. We want to be able to use our brains. The first way that we do that with functioning is to maintain things like strength, balance, endurance, energy, being able to stretch, and being able to have flexibility. And you might say, okay, well, I can touch my toes, so does that mean I'm all good? Well, that's great. That's actually a wonderful thing if you can touch your toes without getting dizzy or be able to get down there. But that flexibility is also in being able to look over your shoulder at what's coming in your side view, what's in your blind spot, the ability to look over your shoulder. Strength, being able to lift the groceries into the store. You know, one of the downfalls of working in this job that I do is that I'm constantly looking around at housing, and I'm saying things like, oh my goodness, that's a townhouse. I live in a townhouse community. And I tell my husband all the time, I'm like, we've got to move and we have to be on one level. Because I know that what's coming is we have to be able to carry those groceries up the stairs. It's not a lot here. I've seen townhomes where there's like 15 stairs into the house. So being able to have that strength, being able to have the endurance to keep up with grandkids. I know that in some sectors, actually, just as a general nation, we're having children older. So for example, I have little ones. I shared that with Pamela earlier. My parents are definitely well into older adulthood. Actually, my father passed away. But my mom has said, I can't keep up with them. And she probably can't keep up with my little guys who are here and there and everywhere all at once. So just being able to maintain that energy, being able to move that branch out of the road that I was talking about. And of course, balance, we know that one of the major reasons why people end up having to move out of their homes is due to a fall where they were injured in such a manner that it was clear that they could not return home. Balance helps with all of that. Now, you might say to me, and this moves on to the next slide, well, I'm not a big exerciser, and that's really not the point. The point is to keep moving. It's being active versus being inactive. Going back to the blue zones that this gentleman found with National Geographic, it's about making movement a part of your life. So many of the people in those blue zone areas, they walk on a daily basis, sometimes because they have to, but they make it, that is their priority. Many of them have gardens that they keep. Making things, I say, make things inconvenient for yourself. And know your own limitations. So instead of, if you have a grocery store nearby, maybe you walk to the store regularly, and that's kind of an outing. Maybe you don't park at the front of the lot, or maybe if you do need to park at the front of the lot, maybe you can park one space down. Do what you can do. The inactivity is really what harms you more, and the activity can really prevent or delay that disease. Activity can also help us manage our stress, and what we're finding, and what we've definitely found during the pandemic, is that stress has an impact on our medical conditions, on our physical health. So take that time to really see how you can just take a breath and relax. The other thing that I would add with some of these things and with the inconvenience is remember to make it a little bit harder, kind of shake your brain up a bit. For those of you who have done exercise, or maybe, at some point in your life learned a new sport, I think all of us have learned something new. Do you remember how long it took you to get that? And then finally, one day, your brain and your muscles just got together and it clicked. I frequently hear this from people saying that, in their exercise routine, whether it was Zumba or jazzercise or cycling, it was really hard at first, and they lost a lot of weight, and they felt like they went somewhere, and then they plateaued. Well, that plateau is, you're now in sync. So part of the inconvenience that I'm talking about is just try something new, make it a little bit different. Maybe instead of walking around the block this way, you walk around the block that way. Make your brain think about what you're doing. And speaking of your brain, next slide, please. One piece that we really want is good cognitive functioning. And remember, when I talk about cognitive functioning, I think we all immediately say, okay, we're talking about our memory, we're talking about dementia. But dementia is really, it has an impact on more than just one aspect of your cognition, and memory is just one aspect. And that impact affects your daily living. So that's when it gets classified as dementia. The other aspects of your cognition, other than memory, include things like attention, being able to have a sustained attention span to something, being able to be in tune with something, language, being able to get that word off of the tip of your tongue. And yes, we all have those tip of the tongue moments, and that doesn't mean that you have dementia, but that language piece is one of those cognitive aspects. Executive functioning is another one of those, and executive functioning are things like planning and sequencing, organizing how you're going to move forward and problem solving. And those always sound typical. But I would challenge you all to remember what you did in grade school, or maybe what your children, their grandchildren did, how to write out directions to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And if you remember, I remember thinking to myself, wow, I never knew there were so many steps to a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You get the peanut butter, you get the jelly, you get the bread, and you put it together. Oh yeah, you use the knife. But where'd you get the peanut butter? What did you use to spread the peanut butter on? And how did you spread the peanut butter? What about the jelly? And if you live in my household versus where my husband's household was when he grew up, you spread the jelly in 2 different ways. So it's a lot more complicated to do something even like walking than we tend to remember because our brain is so used to it. The last part of cognitive functioning is that visual spatial, which so much helps or impacts our driving ability. There is a visual aspect to it that happens with us as we age because our vision tends to come in. And we tend to lose some of that peripheral vision. But this is really about being able to take what we're seeing and interpret it. That's what this part means. So it's important to keep on doing things that keep our brain engaged and keep our brain active. And people always ask me, well, what's better to do? Is it better to do puzzles or crossword? Is it better to do reading? And just like the activity, it's really just make it a part of your life. If you're not a person who likes reading, that's probably not going to be the thing for you. On the other hand, maybe there's something you can do with the reading if you are a reading person. That will kind of make your brain stop and do that whole thing that I was talking about earlier. For example, I was an English lit major, but I'm a secret fantasy sci-fi person, and I can read a sci-fi, well, not all sci-fi, I'm actually not, it's more fantasy. I can read a 300-page book in no time at all if it's that topic. But I know that typically some of these other either cultural novels, nonfiction, some of those have much more depth to them. So just switching my brain up a little bit and having to force it to slow down in order to get those words. For example, even as an English lit major, I never read Tolstoy, and I found that was amazingly difficult, but I really liked it. Perhaps you're a crossword puzzle person. So maybe instead of just doing the crossword puzzle, or maybe today on Monday, I look at one of the other puzzles that are in the newspaper and not the crossword puzzle, just to kind of shake it up a little bit. Doesn't mean that tomorrow I won't go back to what I enjoy, but at least kind of switching it up just a little bit. Find something you want to learn, set a new goal for yourself. Frequently people talk about languages. That's not for everybody, but you can learn a new language. You can decide that now's the time when I'm actually going to take those piano lessons because I don't have anybody else who has to take them, and I can just pay for it for myself. The other piece of it is people say that older adults don't get technology. And I think that's something that many older adults have internalized. However, older adults are frequently some of the first people who pick up on new things. Back about, actually it's going on a little while now, but back in 2008 and 2009, it was the people who were 55 and older who were jumping on Facebook. With the pandemic, so many people, all of you who are listening here today, probably may have learned how to use Zoom and GoToMeetings and all of these extra things. even for myself, you probably fit into some of these categories. Even if you've used it before, now you're almost an expert at it. I mean, obviously, sometimes we still have errors that happen. So just try something new. Don't be afraid of it just because it's stereotypical. Next slide. This I can't say more emphatically. That's why I put it in bright yellow. Depression is not a normal part of aging. And just one more time for repetition, depression is not normal for aging. Next slide. Depression, we tend to think that depression is normal, and I hate to say it, but I have given these presentations or given the depression presentation that I do, and many older adults will say, well, of course it's a normal part of aging, but it's not at all. It's okay to feel blue about things. It's definitely okay and very healthy to grieve for things that have been lost, whether it's people or loved ones, and also whether it is something physical. Some of the changes that happen to us really do impact us, and it's okay to grieve those because that's how we come to terms with it and we can move on. It's when it starts impacting us for an extended length of time and it impacts our daily functioning that it becomes depression. And then we really do need to get help for that. Stress, again, I talked about this earlier, but stress really does cause depression. It's important to focus on new goals. Again, thinking to yourself, what do I want my successful aging to look at? It is said that people who, glass half full people with positive thoughts tend to get another 7.6 years than the rest of us. I'm admittedly a glass half empty person, so that's one thing, just trying to have that moment of gratitude each day. Finding the positivity that happens can really be helpful in that regard. Next slide. And to that point, one of the best things that we can do is to find our tribe. Put family first, and remember that family is sometimes a family of choice, not the family that we're born into. Make sure that we're developing those relationships. One of the interesting things that the gentleman said in the blue zone as well was that, you know, finding the right tribe, the people who support you and what you do. So the people who take all of these things, the being active, eating properly, and associating more with that tribe. So not just clearly people who share values, share interests, etc., but maybe also people who would prefer to go for a walk and talk as opposed to sit and have coffee or whatever. Maybe all three: walk, talk, coffee. Find some place to volunteer. There's been a lot of research done about how volunteers really do make the world go round. Anybody who's ever had kids in school knows that without parent volunteers, it wouldn't happen. And the same is true as we get older. Our communities really need us all to be involved. Our museums need the experience and the authenticity of the volunteers who are there presenting the material. For example, even at Seabury, we have volunteers who help keep people's homes clean and their yards raked and swept. So this is what happened. These are people making the world go round. Make sure you're reinventing yourself. you can build on your strengths. And that last slide I talked about, it's okay to grieve the things that we've lost. You take the values and the person that you were, and you move that forward. And for example, I'll tell you this, if I did this, in fact, I did this talk, or a similar one to it. I've done this talk every year for the past, I would say, 10 years. It has definitely changed, but one of the things when I first started was I had injured my hip and I couldn't run. I was a cross-country runner, a long-distance runner, until I would say probably just about the pandemic. I would have told you that I'm a runner. And in my head, those things that come with being a runner are still there. Those races that I had to endure through, those lessons are still there. And although I really can't honestly call myself a runner anymore, I still have those things that made me a decent runner, a persistent runner, are still there. And those I carry forward into this next phase. But I can let go of that. I was a runner. So being able to turn around and reinvent yourself, building on that strength that you have, and you all have so many strengths. We all have so many strengths, and those are what carry us through the learning from one situation to the next situation. You cannot make it to 100 without things like good genes, good support, good community, but also learning from your experiences and being able to take on the next challenge. Ways of reflection and reminiscing can be scrapbooking or journaling, and this also reduces stress. And it doesn't have to be scrapbooking and journaling about things that happened 50 years ago. It can be the things that are happening right now. In fact, that tends to be the best piece. I would say one exception to that might be somebody who is caring for someone with dementia, because that reminiscing in the scrapbook is frequently something positive, or can be something positive to use with them. Just try new things. The other piece that I would say that doesn't go with kind of your own with the physical and the mental, is really about planning ahead to be in control. And I say that because getting older can be scary for people. But knowing what resources are out there, what your options are, and trying to make some of those plans ahead of time can really be helpful, so that if something happens, you know where you can turn to. Kind of, okay, what are my options? Do I want to stay here in this house? And what does that mean? What are my choices when I make that decision? Does it mean that I have to move my bedroom down to the first floor? And what does the county have to offer? What supports, like Dementia Free America, what do they have to offer? I know Pamela read that whole list of good community supports, but there are other ones out there. I believe that Dementia Free America found me through the Prince George's Senior Provider Network. That's a wonderful resource for the people in Prince George's County, and each one of them, GROWS is the name of the similar professional organization in Montgomery County. So finding what are those resources and what are the options are good. And recognize, moving on to the next slide as I finish up here, that really growing old, that term that we hear at the weddings, grow old with me, the best is yet to come. That has to be our signal. That has to be our call. The best is yet to come. We just have to make it that way. So in summary, moving on to the next slide and then finishing up here, we retire from a job, but we don't retire from living, and living does take work. We can choose to be a passive participant and see what luck comes our way, or we can be active and engaged, and that active and engaged really does impact our whole person. And just keeping our eye on the prize, that the best is yet to come.